what is resilience? So we need a working definition to start, the conversation. And for us, resilience is the ability to take on difficult challenges, cope with adversity, and still find meaning. Now, many people can take on difficult challenges, can cope with adversity, but without meaning, life has no substance. It's survival. It's not actually living. So we say, well, meaning is fundamental when we're talking about resilience. And if we look at it in more detail, respond positively to difficult situations, rise above adversity, cope when things look bleak, tap into hope, transform unfavorable situations into wisdom, insight, and bounce back, endure physically and emotionally, and lastly, to be able to change to reflect the priorities arising from experience and prepare for the next stressful situation. Coming from an integral school of coaching, we like to look at things always from three perspectives. Of course, it's important that we have the insight. It is fundamental that we understand our why. What is the meaning of what we are doing in our headspace? And at the same time, our emotions are critical. Like, for example, what I was talking about, well, there's the hope, there's the, looking at things in a positive light, but there's also those difficult, tough emotions that I was talking about, the fear, the anger, denial, and those, how do we work with those and embrace them so that we can actually channel them to go further? And of course our body is where stress and fatigue are housed. And if we work with our body in a coherent way, we can actually integrate that in the way that we look at things, we will be able to come out and build our capacity for resilience. So in effect, what we're doing is we're saying this is sustainably looking at ourselves as a way to work sustainably with ourselves, both head, heart, and gut. Welcome. So to set the scene in terms of resilience, we've got, over time, this can be a short period of time or a long period of time. And if you engage adversity without resilience, now for example, let's take a situation where you're going along happily, but you take on an extra project at work. Does that sound familiar? It's like, oh, come, you can take care of this. Or for example, you decide, oh, we're going to move house, or we're going to get married, or there's someone new arriving in the family. These things are big life events that happen that can perhaps cause us to be a little bit more fatigued than usual. And then adversity strikes. Like, for example, a restructuring is suddenly announced in an organization, or perhaps we lose our jobs. And then we find it very difficult, if we have a lower level of resilience, to suddenly start being able to make meaning of what is actually happening to us. And if we go down and we come down here and we can't come to terms really with what's going on, and we find it difficult, this space, and to come out, we can't really cope. And we kind of go, we feel a little bit better, but that frog in the pot story, we kind of, we make do and we carry on and we cope, because we can. And this then, what happens generally is that it repeats, and it repeats, and it repeats, and then our level of resilience erodes. And if we don't take care of it, that's that slippery slope towards the edge of where we fall down. Now, this is where we're going to play and take our time to explore this, is say, well, what is a situation where we have a higher level of resilience, where as we enter, because we have an understanding of what's going on, we can start making sense. We can have some meaning of what is actually happening. We know we're going to go down a little bit, but we can reconcile and start to understand, and then come out of here thriving into a situation where we actually have a higher level of resilience than we did when we started and came out. Sounds great, doesn't it? Okay, yeah. How? How do we actually go about doing that? And this is where I'd like to hand over to Dr. McNeil, who's going to take us through a fascinating story and journey.
Hello. I was approached a couple of years ago by a law firm in London who were just about to undergo a year-long fraud trial in a foreign jurisdiction. And they really approached me for some help in preparing for this challenge. because what they really needed to do during this year is maintain the team's full performance, well-being and health. When they go into trial, I don't know if any of you are familiar with lawyers and how they prepare for trial, it's exceptionally hard work. It's very demanding, focused, long hours, but normally it doesn't last for very long. The trials are a fairly short period of time. And during that time, they become increasingly exhausted and tired and drained, and often end up ill afterwards and need to actually build in time after trial to recover before they go back to work. And the issue that they faced approaching this particular year-long trial was how were they going to maintain their performance for a whole year? In other words, how could they prepare for this marathon trial rather than the sprints that they normally do?
So, now I'd like to take you through a little piece of theory to be able to see, well, what are some of the ways, the how, in terms of how you can work with this. So this work, in terms of zones of tolerance, is drawn from an author by the name of Ted Usatinsky. He wrote a book called Instinctual Intelligence, the Primal Wisdom of the Nervous System and the Evolution of Human Nature. This is a fascinating book. It's a bit of a heavy read, but it's really, really interesting. And Ted is a friend of mine, and we've been working together, based in Colorado in the US, as I said, and we've been working together for the last 2 years to understand how our instinctual nervous system impacts, helps, and or hinders us in the work that we do and how we engage with others. And this is some really fascinating work. And it's stuff that I use with my clients when I'm working with them. And if we look at the arousal level here on the x-axis, the y-axis, we've got the going through time. This is like a day. We get up in the morning, we have our coffee, our arousal level rises, we go through our day, a little dip before lunch, and then we go for a strenuous workout, or we have a really, really tough fight with our boss. And then we go home, and just after dinner, where our arousal level goes down, we perhaps watch some TV and then go to bed. So that's the kind of principle in terms of arousal level. On this graph, there are two areas which are really interesting to look at where we get tripped up. The first is what we call the blue zone. Now, the blue zone is what is also commonly known as the freeze or the shame response. Now, this response instinctually was really, really helpful when there was a massive T-Rex thundering by and you didn't move. You shut down. Your nervous system is programmed to literally shut down. Today, it is not particularly helpful in our organizations when we hit a freeze response or the shame response. However, this is an zone in the higher areas where we start going to more of a reflective space and contemplation. So it can also be very useful. On the upper arousal level, we've got the red zone. Now what happens here is it's the fight, flight, or stress response. And as we go up here, indeed, we get into that aggression. It's something that we can engage with, and it's like, right, I'm gonna go, there's that kind of engagement. And all of a sudden we focus, all our adrenaline goes, and we start breathing up here, and we really want to get involved, and there's some quite angry situations that can occur. So, what do we like? So there's a story. Let me share a story with you, because I like to tell you stories as well. I was working with a very senior executive the other day, and he said to me, one of my peers really, really pissed me off. And I was having a conversation with him over the phone, and as we were having the conversation, I got into a fight state where I got aggressive, we had a conversation, and then indeed the outcome was not as satisfactory as it would have been when I am more in a calm, grounded state. I said to him, how many open questions did you ask him? None. Not at all. Nada. We just went straight in, And I said, well, what can we do about that, right? Another example, recently, Serena Williams at the US Open. She did great. She went up to the umpire. She made her point. She was being very grounded, and then she lost it. In a high-stakes environment, she got triggered into rage, and she paid the price. It happens to all of us. So it's saying, how can we now work with this? And this is where the work with Ted is really interesting. It's saying, we have what we call a window of tolerance, and now we can play here. And this, if we start to look at how we can expand and flex our window of tolerance, like for example, here in the fight, flight, stress, is saying, as I was saying, your breathing is up here. If you can lower your breathing, you'll immediately go down and you will lower your arousal level. If you can sense it as you're going up before you trigger, okay? Another way is to go and sense your big toe. So you're using your body as a tool, as a way in to actually expand your window of tolerance. Or for example, on the free shame response, something very pragmatic that we do with the people that we work with is say, after lunch, when you're a little bit low, go for a walk and talk meeting. Don't sit around a table and go out, and because why? You stand up, your proprioceptors are firing, and obviously that immediately augments your arousal level. So you can engage in a way that's completely different than if you're sitting around a table digesting. So that's very pragmatic ways that you can go about expanding your window of tolerance. And hopefully now I've woken up your curiosity that this is something maybe you can start working with yourselves and noticing when you get triggered either up or down, and what could you start possibly doing. And I'm now going to hand back to, before we go on to that, we need to say, well, how do we go about measuring resilience? This is very important. So you can either, as we were saying with our body, it's a great indicator of what's happening. Not always accessible for everybody because we haven't been taught that. So on the other hand, what we have, and we've handed out some questionnaires that you have, is to use a questionnaire to identify areas that you can work on specifically in your domains. And Mecky, in her story, used another way of assessing, which is through one-on-one interviews.
Yeah, so when after we'd had our original meeting, we went on to the assessment to find out what the needs were of the team to be able to prepare themselves for the trial. And we started off by doing a full review of what their current behaviours are. This involved looking at their overall health and well-being, how their diet, their sleep and their exercise patterns, their general self-care. Then we focused in on their current trial behaviour and analysed what they were actually doing. The long days, the 7 days a week. This led to erratic meal times, very poor diet. It meant they had little or no sleep whilst they were during the trial, and they also did very little exercise. Also, it meant that they had very little time for their family and friends and for the other commitments that they attend to outside the workplace. The thing with normal trial conditions was that it's a limited time. And because it was just for a very short period of time, they could focus and behave in this way. It's a sprint, but this trial was going to be a marathon, and it was quite clear that this behaviour was unsustainable for them. So we decided that we really needed to focus on building their endurance and finding a way of maintaining their well-being.
Now this is a topic that I find really fascinating, is to say, let's take this a little bit further. So if we start at the beginning and say, okay, well, under normal circumstances, we tend to avoid disorder and disruption. We like things to be safe, and we know what's going to happen, and there's a specific order. Right, this is how we like things to be, actually. But we're vulnerable, right? So we say, well, it's important that we build our resilience, and what we're talking about. And so instead of being a sandcastle on the sea, which gets washed away when a wave comes, well, we build ourselves a wall, so we can resist, and we're stronger, which is very good. It's very, very, very helpful. And you can stand up to shocks without flinching. However, you may not necessarily be changing who you are. And coming from work by a gentleman by the name of Nassim Taleb, references here, he wrote a book called Black Swan and another one called Anti-Fragile, Things That Gain from Disorder. And the notion is to say, well, what if we were to build our capacity, like, for example, playing with those zones of tolerance, flexing, becoming stronger, so that not only are we able to resist things that come at us, but we actually gain from chaos. That we actually, that it gives us something that we not only survive, but we flourish. That the volatility, the randomness, and the stressors allow us to thrive and grow. Because the world that we live in is changing at a rapid rate. We're all aware of this. The technology curve we know is just starting. So what if we were to say, instead of building our resilience, we start to build a capacity of anti-fragility, where shocks and disruptions actually make us stronger, more creative, and better able to adapt. I see some of you smiling and going, okay, this is, and that's exactly what we're trying to invite people into. With your zones of tolerance, start to be curious and say, well, actually, if I start to flex my muscles, I can start to build that capacity to be anti-fragile. Oh no, sorry, still me. Oh, I keep forgetting. So how to build resilience. So we're now going into, again, we've looked at this before, but in terms of your cognitive space, the idea being not only the self-reflection and understanding and the self-awareness, but also being able to make meaning. What is my meaning? What is my why? Why do I get up and do what I do? This is all in your cognitive space. In your emotional space, this is a space where, indeed, those elements that we spoke about earlier, how can I start to learn to embrace those difficult emotions? There's some fantastic work that was done by a lady called Susan Davis, who happens to be South African as well, but that's by the by. She's in Harvard and doing it. She's got a wonderful TED talk. I'd invite you to look at it. And she develops a notion of emotional agility. And there, how can we develop a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset? How can we go about, learning, how to embrace our difficult emotions? What are practical examples and practices that we can do to build that? And of course, your body, the sleep, the nutrition, all those, the well-being. How do you cultivate that? But also now, hopefully, I've expanded your view to say, what if you were to introduce those zones of tolerance as well in your body to build your capacity that we have here, that we walk around with every day?
Okay, so what did we actually do together in preparing for this trial? Before they went off, I did a full health assessment and suggestions and interventions with each of the team. We assessed carefully the type of sleep they were getting, the importance of sleep, and also how to manage jet lag with foreign travel. As a group, we looked very closely at their nutrition and their general diet, and looked in particular at building a diet plan that's balanced and all the necessary food groups for performance, and also the importance of regular meal times when they're away. We then turned to exercise, and I worked very closely with a fantastic personal trainer who came into their office 6 times before they left and built with them an exercise program for an hour using high-intensity interval training and stretching. And when they left for the trial, she designed the weekly exercise program just using simple bands that they could pack into their suitcases so that they were regularly exercising whilst they're away during the trial. Next, we look at their accommodation. Normally they were considering staying in a hotel, but we assessed and had a look at what benefits and downsides this might offer. And it became clear that the problem with hotel living for a year would raise issues with diet and food, the possibility for exercise, and the social isolation that would inevitably bring. And it didn't really offer them time to relax and downtime, which could pose a problem over the year. So instead, we decided that they would find a house to rent that fitted the whole team, with plenty of communal space for them to be together, and create a home environment so at the end of each day of the trial they could come back and relax and lead a slightly more normal existence rather than living in a hotel. This space also offered them a place for friends and family to come and stay, which when you're away from home for a year was very important. Initially, we took a chef as well who prepared their meals for them to ensure they were getting a healthy diet, and they worked and exercised together. And finally, we agreed that they should organize a weekend plan that every weekend, whilst they're away, they would take on new activities, explore where they were staying, and make sure that they had downtime to relax. So what was the outcome of all of this? The first thing I really want to stress is it was a huge shift in behavior from how they normally prepared and how they normally underwent a trial. And they were a really highly motivated group who supported each other and took on all the interventions on board and worked together to achieve them. What was particularly successful in this trial was the house, actually, because what that allowed them to do was to work together, to get to know each other better, and really form a strong bond as a team. After a while, they actually decided to take the cooking on themselves, and that was another form of relaxation which, after a very long day, they enjoyed and ensured that they were taking care and responsibility of their own health. The weekends also provided a real downtime for them all and allowed them to get to know each other better as a group. And what about the measurable outcomes? Well, this is one of the most incredible things. We were all surprised. During the trial, not one of them fell ill. Not one person became unwell during the entire trial. At the end of the trial, all of them had lost weight, and they were all fitter than before they started. And although the trial was extremely hard work, very demanding, they actually enjoyed themselves. They really felt fulfilled by the experience. They had a feeling of achievement that, as a team, you just feel that positive energy with them when they're working together. Since they've come back, they're now been back from the trial for a year, they still exercise every week together. The personal trainer still comes in once a week, and now they've nominated one of the team to run a second class, and this is constantly building their team work and the way they work together. And over the last year, I've been doing ongoing one-to-one coaching with them to help them grow in their own professional development as well. So it's a huge success story.
So indeed, this is an example, hopefully you can see and understand now, how they actually came through, worked in this space, and came out, to their great surprise, where they were just hoping to survive, actually, and not, get really ill in the trial, but came out better, and healthier, and stronger, and more united as a team. So we have something for you, a gift on your seat, and we would invite you to complete your questionnaire when you have time. Today we won't have time together to do it. And use your instincts, not your head, please. And don't look at the last page where there's the final score sheet. Sabrina, no. And, so please fill out the questionnaire and then score yourselves on the back sheet, and then go through it and look for outliers. Look for any patterns that you can see or outliers relative to your scores. So if you score high, then look at the little low ones, or if you score low naturally, then look at the higher and the low ones. There's no right or wrong answer. And what we'd like to invite you to do, the invitation for those of you who attended the talk here today, is that if you would like to debrief your questionnaire with either Dr. McNeil or myself, you have our contact details on there. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us, to have a call, and we'll be happy to debrief your questionnaire with you and see where is it that you could perhaps work yourself. So in conclusion, this is what Andrew Ford, the principal of the organization that Mecky was working with. So we are leaner, meaner, happier and healthier fighting machine. And they managed to do this by, as Mecky described, working together in a very pragmatic way, understanding where they were, and working on very small, concrete steps with respect to why they were doing it. It was very clear for them why they were doing it. Why was it? Well, because if they didn't do it, they could get really, really, really ill. So for them, it was a very clear why and a very clear focus. So they managed to get together, focus as a team, and come with results that were extraordinary for them, where in the profession they don't believe that this is possible. So this is actually a really great example of something that can happen. And our invitation that we would like to leave with you with today is that you guys look for what is your meaning, what is your why. How can you also start expanding your windows of tolerance and start to think, how could I become more anti-fragile in the world as I go out from today? Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, we're here now or on our stand in the corner over there, which we'd be delighted to interact with you. Thank you very much.